and you are the branches, he tells his disciples. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. And if that's not blunt enough, Jesus goes on, whoever doesn't abide in me, well, those branches just get chopped and they wither, and then they are gathered into a fire and burned. How are we all feeling now, Lone Rangers? This is clearly not an I did it my way passage. Lutheran minister Nadia Bolz-Weber perhaps says it best. She says, Christianity is a lousy religion for the I'll do it myself set. A well-known Christian vintner, commenting on this passage, said this, the grapevine by itself does not produce very attractive fruit, as the branches will go all wild and they will seed lots and lots and lots of tiny little grapes. But they'll mostly be seeds, and they're not much use as fruit. So I guess we all need tending. We all need tending. This gives us some good insight into what Jesus may have been talking about. Jesus tells his disciples, God is the vine grower. Jesus is the vine, and we are the branches. All of those branches need tending and pruning, or they just go wild, and then they produce little tiny grapes with lots of seeds, and they're not much good for anything. Jesus says that the branches that don't bear fruit, those will be removed, and those that bear fruit will be pruned, so they can bear more fruit. But the irony here is that the vines that don't bear fruit, they're only cut once and done. But the ones that bear fruit, they're pruned over and over again to continuously bear more fruit. And the thing is, if you've seen a pruned branch, it's not a very pretty sight. But it is a reminder to us of the source of that branch. It's only their connection to that vine. We need to be reminded of our source in God, in Christ, that we are merely the branches told to abide. One of my seminary professors writing on this passage wrote, divine pruning orients us toward growth. God prunes us with challenging possibilities intended for our growth, not as punishment. As we enter this morning's gospel, we find ourselves back on the evening of Maundy, Thursday, with Jesus with his disciples, knowing he is going to die and he's going to leave his disciples behind. So he's urging them to remain in him, stay connected to him, abide in him, and remain in fellowship with one another. Jesus is saying to each of his disciples and to us all these thousands of years later, stay connected. Live in relationship to me and stay connected and in relationship to one another. Make your home in me, just as I make it in you. Continue in my teaching and example, and then remain in fellowship with one another. And then he gives us this wonderful image of the vine and the branches. Now, if we think about wild grapevines, or any vine for that matter, one thing that we realize is that vines and branches are tangled and they're messy. I have a few clematis in my yard, and I was tending to them this week, and I was trying to figure out how to separate some of the branches to cut off the icky looking stuff and where I could see buds, and they were so tangled together that I couldn't make any sense of where one stopped and the other one began. They were so densely tangled together, so interconnected. This is the truth of the matter, that our lives and our families and our places of work or study or play or worship, they're all messy places. Life is just that way. And sometimes, as Boltz-Weber continues, it's just too hard to know what is what. Life is just a viney, branchy, jumbled, tangled mess. Yet, when we look at a cultivated grapevine, Julie, can you move to that next slide? When we look at a cultivated grapevine, we can see that the vine grower has put an anchor on the main vine. The branches are sorted out. You can go to the next one. Those branches are sorted out. They're trained, and they're even disciplined. There's a wire structure that supports above and below. All of those dead branches have been pruned, and the vines and the branches that have been cultivated, they end up producing loads and loads of fruit. With this image that Jesus shares, he shows us that Christ is the source of all life, and our very existence is dependent upon God, who nurtures and cultivates us. We are, and we cannot be, the vine that gives life to all. Neither are we the vine grower who does the cultivation, who stakes and supports and prunes and disciplines. Although sometimes we like to claim that sort of authority. We are the branches, and if we are going to flourish, we need to stay connected to that vine. We need to abide and to remain dependent on that source. To abide is all about remaining, staying, taking up residence, making oneself at home. Abide is the key word that Jesus uses in this passage. It appears 8 times in these 8 verses. If God is the vine grower, Jesus is the vine, and we are the branches, what should we do? We only have one task. It is to abide, to tarry, to stay, to remain, to cling, to commit, to endure, to accept, to hang in there for the long haul, to make ourselves at a tricky word. It's passive on the one hand and active on the other. It means passively to stay rooted in place, but it's also active because it means that we need to grow and multiply and change. It's a vulnerable making verb because if we abide, we get pruned. So it means letting go of those things that don't provide for our growth. Things like fear and hatred and greed and jealousy and grudges and resentment and shame and guilt and all of the other viney, branchy, tangled up messes that we find ourselves in. Abide is a risky verb. If we abide, we will bear fruit that others can see and taste. That's what being a disciple is. And it's a humbling verb. If we abide, we have to accept nourishment that is not of our own making. This is not an I'll do it myself thing, this abiding. And it's a relentlessly communal verb. If we abide, we have to coexist with all of those other branches. This connectedness that Jesus is speaking of is only found in if we experience what it means to be together in community, in a faith community. And yes, living in that kind of relationship, that kind of abiding in Christ and staying connected to Christ, it's not always going to be comfortable or easy. It can be difficult, it can be tangled up, it can be messy. As I was writing this, I was reflecting on the last Presbyterian meeting when there was so much discussion on what we were going to do with the monies from Vanderkamp. It got messy. It got tangled up in all of this connectedness. Living in relationship with others takes give and take. And such living requires us to be vulnerable. Living in relationship means that there will be ups and downs as we travel this journey together. This kind of abiding means that we will have to live a life that is messy, and it's crowded, and it's tangled, but it's also beautiful and gorgeous. A life that is at once deeply rooted, but also beautifully fertile. To abide, to be deeply connected, to be planted in the very life of God, and to be in an intimate relationship with both God and with one another. No, I did it my way in this passage. We need to see reality as Jesus is telling us. Not that Jesus is sitting around waiting for us to get organized, because heaven knows that's difficult for us to do, but rather that he's already started this nourishment and this growth within us and through us. I am the vine, you are the branches. Done deal. Meaning that whether we like it or not, our lives are bound up in his and in one another. Meaning that the only true life is if we consent to live in this relationship with God through Christ and with one another, with all of its messiness and all of its entanglements, all of the good and the bad and the ugly and the beautiful. The only fruit that's worth sharing is that we have produced together. So remember, our vine is true. Our vine grower is skilled. And abiding, that's what we are called to do. Thanks be to our vine and our vine grower.